Hello and welcome to the impact of frequency, intensity, location, and sociability of exercise on the well-being measures of UK adults. This research was conducted for a thesis for my Master's in Counselling program, and my name is Rebee Altman. The WHO defines well-being as a state in which an individual realizes their own potential and can cope with and is able to contribute to the community. There are many factors that are involved in the system of mental well-being, such as social, economic, physical health, environmental, and epigenetic factors. Exercise has been the focus of many well-being studies over the years. And its relationship between itself and well-being is well established. Lower levels of physical exercise have been correlated to higher numbers of depression and anxiety by the WHO. And Fantini et al. Found that individuals who exercised more during the first lockdown presented with lower levels of anxiety compared to those who did not exercise as much. Where exercise takes place may also be an important variable to its effectiveness. Research has shown that physical exercise at home base was preferable to an activity. And maintaining an exercise program at home has been shown to prevent stress, reduce depression, especially during quarantines. Individuals who participated in outdoor activities during the lockdown appeared to experience smaller declines in their well-being scores compared to participants who did not exercise as much outdoors. However, neither the studies that looked at home or the studies that looked at outdoor exercise compared the two. And this is an important comparison that is going to be looked at in this study. Many studies have looked at the negative effects of isolation on well-being, but few have taken on the value of sociability with regard to exercise. Walter et al. Study into veterans exercise intervention looked at the benefits of exercising in teams, but didn't feature a solitary group. So it's difficult to say if their results came from exercise, socializing, or a combination thereof. Research already shows that all of the variables listed, frequency, intensity, location, sociability, do have an impact on well-being. But what research needs to discover is how these variables interact. This study will explore the exercising habits of 300 adults in the UK, as well as measuring their mental well-being and stress levels. The aim of the study is to investigate the relationships of several of the exercise variables with measures of well-being. As mentioned, the independent variables here are frequency, intensity, location, and sociability of exercise. And the dependent variables are psychometrics, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, the WEMWBS, the PERMA-Profiler, and the Perceived Stress Scale. There are three hypotheses. The first is that participants who report more regular exercise will report higher levels of well-being. Second is participants who report more of their exercises coming from outdoors will report higher levels of well-being. And then the last is that the social nature of exercise will affect reported well-being of participants. In total, 369 adults in the UK with ages ranging from 18 to 65 participated in the study. All participants answered the survey in either English or Welsh, with only 4 participants answering in Welsh. The majority of the participants indicated that they were Caucasian, European, or white in ethnicity, and 205 participants self-identified as UK citizens. There were no exclusion criteria other than all participants needed to be living in the UK and over the age of 18. And the sample was an opportunity sampling with many Bangor University psychology students taking part, as there was participation credits offered to undergraduate students. The study utilized a survey method, which asked questions about exercise habits and had participants answer the 3 psychometric tests to gauge their well-being. This is a quantitative between subjects design. The first between subjects independent variable was exercise amount as measured by frequency and intensity. This was divided into 2 groups of 3, with frequency divided up as less than the WHO recommended amount of exercise, being group 1. Group 2 was the WHO's required amount of exercise, and then the third group was greater than the amount of exercise recommended by the WHO. And the participants identified whether they exercised vigorously or moderately. The second between subjects independent variable was exercise location, as divided between indoors and outdoors on a sliding scale and broken into 4 quartiles. The third between subjects independent variable was exercise sociability. Initially, 3 categories of sociability were teams, groups, and individuals. However, due to the fact that this study was performed during the 2020 COVID-19 epidemic, it turns out very few people were exercising in teams or in groups. And in the end, we had to create a binary option. So it was either people who exercised all the time alone or people who exercised occasionally with others. And again, the dependent variables were the scores on the psychometrics. The participants accessed a questionnaire online on Qualtrics and either answered in English or Welsh. The participants received an information sheet and a consent form. They then were asked for their email address, but it wasn't obligated that they provide this information unless they were receiving credits for taking the survey, or they wanted to find out what information we discovered at the end with research findings. Participants received instructions on the questionnaires, filled out demographic information, and answered the psychometrics. The psychometrics were not available in Welsh, so all such psychometrics were answered in English. Then participants answered closed and open questions about their exercise, including types and locations. And the final section was a debrief statement explaining the aims and the purpose of the research project. The WEMWBS score for the entire population was skewed slightly positive, but this is expected based on the prior findings by the Warwick Medical School. The PERMA-Profiler was also skewed slightly positively, and again, that was expected based on previous research. And the PSS scale was also slightly skewed. Moderate and vigorous exercise, as previously discussed, were divided into 3 categories that you can see here: less than the recommended amount, the minimum recommended amount, more than the recommended amount. And as you exercised more, the scores on the WEMWBS appear to increase. This is also the case for vigorous. For moderate exercise, the scores on PERMA increased as the amount of exercise increased. And it was the same for vigorous. And for the perceived stress scale, stress reduced the more participants exercised moderately. But it wasn't exactly the same for vigorous. Exactly the amount of exercise needed, recommended, and more than the amount recommended had nearly identical scores on perceived stress. An analysis of variance was performed on exercise amount, and there were significant findings. For moderate exercise, the WEMWBS score was significant in all three groups, and a post hoc comparison using Turkey HSD test established that the group less than recommended did not, in fact, differ significantly from the other groups. The same was true for PERMA-Profiler. And PSS scale. The same ANOVA was run, but this time analyzing vigorous groupings. And significant findings were found for all three, but post hoc comparisons did not find that the grouping less than the recommended amount differed greatly from the others. Next, we will look at the indoors versus outdoors. The quartiles were set up so that the first quartile starts at no time indoors to 10% of the time exercising indoors. The second quartile was 11% of the time to 50% of the time exercising indoors. Then the third quartile was 51% to 70% of the time exercising indoors. And the fourth quartile was 71 to 100% of the time exercising indoors. And as you can see, the WEMWBS score showed a slight decrease if all time was spent exercising indoors. A similar pattern was shown for PERMA-Profiler. And for perceived stress, if all exercise was taken indoors, or the vast majority of time was taken indoors, there was apparently an increase in stress. And here are the two categories for alone versus not alone. So any time spent exercising socially was one group, and 100% of the time exercising alone was the other. And again, this was due to the fact that during quarantine, most people couldn't exercise with others, so we had to adjust our categories. If all exercise was taken alone, there was a decrease in the WEMWBS score. There was also a decrease in the PERMA score for all exercise taken alone, and an increase in the stress if all exercise was taken alone. A correlational analysis was used to look at sociability, and it was discovered that they were significant, the differences between exercising socially and exercising alone. With the PERMA-Profiler and the WEMWBS showing decreasing scores, and the PSS showing an increasing score, and they were both one-tailed. Stepwise regression analysis was performed looking at moderate exercise, sociability of exercise, and location of exercise, predictors for WEMWBS. The analysis determined that only exercise intensity could really explain the model, at 8.2% of the model being explained by the variance of intensity alone. All other variables did not provide additional variance. The same stepwise comparison was run, this time looking at vigorous, with the same result. 4.3% of the variance in the model was explained by exercise intensity alone, and all other models did not add to the variance. Stepwise comparisons were then run for the PERMA-Profiler and received similar results, with moderate intensity and vigorous intensity explaining 6.6% and 5.9% respectively, and no other variables were associated with additional variance. And then finally, the stepwise analysis was performed for the perceived stress scale, with moderate intensity model explaining 4.8% and vigorous intensity explaining 3.3%, and all other variables were not associated with additional variance. Complex system theory states that it is impossible to fully understand the intricacies involved in any complex system. And the study was designed to increase understanding of how aspects of one part of a system might interact with others through the principle of reduction, which is the seeking of knowledge of a system through the exploration of its elements. Unfortunately, the research was performed during the 2020-2021 university year, during which COVID-19 pandemic prevented many people from performing previously normal daily activities. Ellen et al. Found that only 3.7% of their participants had completely discontinued their exercise activities during pandemic, but 48% of their participants had to modify their normal routines. As a result of this, though the study does provide an insight, it might not provide the insight into what was considered normal behavior for the participants. As a result of the COVID restrictions, the study had to reduce the sociability hypothesis to reflect the available data. Rather than being able to compare teams, groups, and alone, the variable had to become time spent all alone versus time spent in the company of others at all. Exercising less than the recommended amount of time in a week was shown across all three well-being variables to have worse outcomes, with consistently more stress as measured by the PSS and lower well-being measured by the WEMWBS and the PERMA-Profiler. This was found to be true regardless of whether or not the participants preferred to exercise vigorously or moderately. The prediction that exercising outdoors would provide better outcomes than exercising indoors was also found to be correct across all three measurements. However, those who spent any of their time exercising with others rather than all of their time exercising alone measured worse on well-being scores and reported higher stress. But this is likely to be an artifact of the COVID experience, as this study did run during the worst of the lockdown, and stress about being near other people during this time may have been understandably higher. When a multilinear stepwise regression was performed on the data to determine how much of a significant result was found by each of the variables working together in accordance with the reduction process of system analysis, the results found that all of the variance in the data was traced back specifically to frequency of exercise. The other variables, though showing significant interactions by themselves when the whole of the picture was analyzed, did not appear to be additive. But this doesn't necessarily mean those effects are not present. Other studies have shown synergistic interaction effects combining outdoor experiences with exercise. This research does continue to support the current literature in the field of exercise effects associated with well-being. It especially supports the current guidelines for the amount of exercise which a person should attain during the week, according to the WHO guidelines. Although interactive effects were not shown to be significant, the raw mean scores for the elements of exercising outdoors does suggest that if the option presents itself, exercising in the open air may be of greater benefit than choosing indoor exercise. So the limitations of this study in addition to the fact that it took place during COVID, which affected the ability for people to exercise normally, is that it was a retrospective self-report study. And if this study could be performed as an experimental group where things can be manipulated in real time, more information could be gathered rather than correlational data. Also, retrospective studies occasionally fail to fully take in the reality of the system based on faulty memory or expectations of desired results. However, I feel that the study is a good place to start, and I'm very proud of it. And I'd like to thank you for participating, and my call to action would be that you should take an opportunity to get a little more exercise, at least 30 minutes a week, according to the WHO. Thank you and have a great